All right, y'all, welcome to Miss Simpson's class. I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to be looking at some tips and tricks on how to draw a realistic mouth. All right, so drawing the mouth. I'm going to use a Secondera pencil for this, and I also have on hand a compass in case you would like to use a compass to draw circles. This may help you out. You can also just draw the circles freehand. So some of the more basic or abstract versions of the mouth I have seen when people draw is starting out with the most basic of all. Sometimes people just draw a curved line to represent a smile. And I've seen people just leave the mouth like that. Some other things that I've seen are people draw the top lip like two triangles or the bottom lip like a curve. Some people may shade in the lips using lines. And that's our basic or abstract version. You may draw lips like this currently, or you may have seen someone draw lips like that before. Today, I'm going to give you tips and tricks that are different from that to help your drawing of a mouth look more realistic. So, we are going to start with a circle guideline. If you haven't drawn lips like this before, it might be strange to you, but think about how your lips are made up. We have a top circle in our top lip. And then we have two circles in our lower lip. That's the breaking down of the shapes of our lips. So I'm starting out with that circle guideline. I'm using the bottom of the top circle to guide the line in between the top and bottom lip. I'm going to do that on my example as well. I'm going to check and see if my lines are symmetrical with my compass. I've already noticed that one line is a little off, so let me just mark that center and see if I have the same type of line from one side to the other. I've noticed this line needs to be a little longer, and that line doesn't really match up the angle, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Again, your drawing does not have to be perfect, but if you notice there's something wrong with it, you can always fix it. So there's our first step, circle guide. That line is going to represent my upper and lower lip. Looking at that top circle, we are going to change it into an upside down peace sign. This is going to give us an example of how full or thin the top lip will be. So looking at our upside down peace symbol, we have that V shape at the top. We're dividing it in half, and we have this V shape. I can put the V shape very close to the line representing the center, or I can put it more towards the top of the circle, depending on how full or how thin I would like for the lips I'm drawing to be. After you've decided where that cutoff is, go ahead and erase the top of your guideline. You don't need that anymore. And we're just going to curve out using that V as a guideline all the way to the corner of the mouth. Again, this shape can change very, very widely depending on who you're drawing. Everybody looks different, so it's great to observe your subject and really notice the changes or differences in that individual so you can make your drawing look more realistic. I'm also going to use those bottom circles as a guideline for where to draw the center of my mouth. And some people's mouth, you see on the bottom lip, it curves upward right there in between the two circles. And other people's mouth, you won't see that, and it will just connect from the bottom circle to the other. What I'm doing now is representing the curves of showing me how I'm going to shade. So I'm using those circles as a guideline, and I'm representing the curves of that 3D form. So my curves are going to get gradually wider following along the circle as we move out to the edge. And they're going to get gradually taller as we move closer to the center of the mouth. So if you're looking at a globe, we're talking about that longitude, the longitudinal lines, they curve around the same way where you have that center axis, and then your lines will slowly get more and more curved as you're moving out from the center. We're going to use these guidelines for shading. Instead of just shading straight up and down like you might have in a more abstract version of the mouth, we are going to follow along those curves that we created in order to create a three-dimensional form. So I'm going to speed mine video up a little bit so you guys can see how this shading works, but it does take your time. So really go through it, spend some time following along each individual curve. Another thing I'm doing while I'm shading is I'm shading darker towards the center of in between the top and bottom lip. That's going to be darker. And then I'm going to use a more lighter pressure moving along the middle, because that area is going to be a more medium tone, not as dark. So the shadow right there is in between the top lip and the bottom lip. That's why that area is going to be the darkest. Again, when I'm going along the top, I'm going to follow those curved lines. So I already have my guideline set in place for that. Same technique with the lower lip. We're going to follow along those curves. Most of the time when you're drawing a person, their upper lip will seem darker than their lower lip. So go ahead and observe that. Everyone's different, but most of the time the upper lip will be darker, the lower lip will be lighter. All right, so now we've shaded everything in. Let's take a look. We're about to add some highlights, but before we do that, let's notice where the mouth is on the face. Okay, so right above the mouth, that connects to the nose, and we have our Cupid's bow that's going to bring the nose to the mouth. So from the highest point of the upper lip, that's where the Cupid's bow is going to come through, and that's a natural point of highlight, which usually also comes to the top of the upper lip. So you will have a lighter space above the upper lip. Another place of highlight is right there in the center of the chin. And also we have a reflected highlight at the bottom of the bottom lip. If you remember drawing a three-dimensional sphere, that's one way where we can put a reflected highlight. Because we're looking directly at the face, the light source is going to be shining on the face. So our reflected highlight is going to be right there at the bottom of the bottom lip. That's going to make this mouth look more three-dimensional. I can go back in and use my eraser tool to also add highlights on the bottom lip. Even when I'm erasing, I'm still going to follow those circle guidelines. So I'm not just erasing up and down. I'm actually erasing that follows the curve that I already set in place with my guidelines. Those longitudinal lines that curve slightly more depending on where you are. And again, most of the time, the bottom lip is going to be lighter than the upper lip. So I'm going to add more highlight to the bottom than I am to the upper lip. If you want the lips to have a different texture, like a glossy texture or a matte texture, the way you add your highlight to the lips definitely can change the texture of the lips. I'm going to go back through and just make sure that I have a very firm shadow in between the upper and lower lip, because that's going to make my drawing look more 3D. And I'll add some shading around the mouth as well. Remember that shadow that's going to be cast by the nose. And there's also a shadow cast by the bottom lip until we get to that highlight on the chin. So those were some tips on how to make your mouth drawing a little more realistic. Try again on your paper. Let me know how it turns out.